Welcome to the Real CP Show. I'm your host, CP. And today's topic called The American Blacks Overall Need Cultural Counseling for Black Pain. Let me repeat the topic. American Blacks overall need cultural counseling for Black pain. Yes. Black pain is real mental manipulation pain for millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of American blacks within the country. See, in this system of supremacy, they have already determined for generations that the American blacks overall will be designated or have been designated as the culture to be culturally bullied for as much as perpetuity as possible. Let me put that again. The system of supremacy, the most brilliant mental manipulation force that is ever existed and was created, and for which most of the time supremacy was created to inflict as much mental manipulation, black pain upon millions of generational American blacks for as much as perpetuity as possible. And they have done brilliancy of that because supremacy overall is still being accepted by quite a number of American blacks overall. See, for me, denial is irrelevant. It truly is. Denial is irrelevant because the only thing you got to look at the actions. What's going on still? Is there still black pain going on toward the American blacks overall? Are they still the most racially discriminated against, the most racially hatred, the most racially oppressed? Of course. For generations. See, it's one of those things where it's understandable why there's so much American black pain going on, right? Where there is such a need for a gigantic amount of cultural counseling. See, the thing about it, for millions of African ancestry Native blacks, otherwise American blacks, that have so much denial, have been programmed with so much denial, have been programmed with so much denial, have been programmed with so much telling their own youth, etc., among each other, different personnel within the culture, hey man, stop talking about the past. The past is the past. Let it go. While other cultures don't do that nonsense. See, that's some cultural mental sickness. When you got millions of African ancestors, Native black people like, well, I'm doing my thing. I ain't got time to worry about that. Who said anything about you got to worry about jack crap? So somebody from this other culture, that culture, right? That's successful. That's doing a thing, right? So they can't do both of those things at the same time. So they can't. You call it word. They call it being culturally keeping their legacy of good and bad to pass down to the next generation. That's common sense. It should be, because it's about cultural preservation. But millions of African ancestors Native blacks just haven't got that concept. Oh. So then there's still contains more American black pain going on. And that is some very sickness, cultural mental sickness going on. Because no other culture in any of no comparisons can say that the majority of their people were brought over to the country and put in enslavement for free for generations. Not a one generation, not a two generation, not a three generations, not a four generation. You see where I'm coming from? Several generations of putting the American blacks overall in enslavement. for free labor. However, telling people within the country that blacks, they don't have souls or they have tails, right? Or they have a curse upon them. I mean, just demonicness, right? And so, obviously, of course, the American black psyche is very distraught overall, with black pain, right? To be so badly culturally bullied for generations, and it just continues. It's like there's no break in black pain going on. And supremacists knows this. So you got some numbers of American blacks that have so much self-hatred toward each other and toward numbers of themselves, where they probably look in the mirror every day. Some of them say, or quite a number of them look in the mirror and say, "Why is my skin black?" They wish they can peel their skin off to get rid of that beautiful melanin. That's sickness. And they really think that people don't see their color. The great Dr. Amos Wilson, an underrated cultural icon, American black. And that's a whole new different conversation topic on there. There is no other culture in this country, regardless, that compare in the racial concept to the great historical powerhouse history that the American blacks have created for generations, even till present time. But especially not long ago. There is no other culture in any comparison. And supremacists knows that in comparison to the American black greatness and achievements. But the British supremacy have made sure not to talk about that as much now. So you still have people with their demonic selves talking about, why do we need to have Black History Month? Sickness. But you got other cultures having their own cultural month. Where's the outrage to that? Where's the outrage to that? However, personnel have an alternative lifestyle category month, week, etc. Where's the outrage to that? Nope. So it's something that is so sinister that they keep doing toward American blacks that many can't figure this silly stuff out. The thing with the critical race theory situation, the demonicness of higher numbers of personnel, right? There are numbers of personnel within predominant-based culture that just have this white lie disturbingness. That's like, I don't want this to taught in the schools. I don't want my kids to sit there and listen to how the country is so bad. What? So the enslavement of uncalculable number of millions of American blacks is supposed to mess up numbers of youth within the predominant culture when that's the truth for generations? Do you see the sickness of that nonsense? Change the dynamic. What if that was American blacks that did that to millions and millions and millions of predominant-based personnel within the culture, predominant-based personnel within that culture? What if American blacks changed the dynamic and did that to them and pull that same nonsense, demonic deflection tactic on them, saying, hey, man, I don't want our youth to sit here about numbers of personnel within the predominant culture doing these wrong things to what they perceive the thing that's been going on toward them. That would not fly, would it? You won't have people going crazy over meetings, stuff like that, schools. I don't want this stuff happening. I don't want this stuff. You wouldn't even have this kind of nonsense happening. But it's something about the destructionary mental sickness by numbers of personnel within quite a number of personnel within the predominant culture for generations that is so ingrained within numbers of them to have so much hatred toward the American blacks, be it direct or indirect. It's almost like an epidemicness of racial hatred from numbers of them. I'm not talking about some of the ones within the predominant culture in history and present, the very small amount that say, look, they may just happen to be within the predominant culture, but they're not like various other personnel within that culture. Much credit to them. Continue to keep doing what you're doing on that. right? Continue to keep doing what you're doing on that. Now, with that being said, however, numbers of the same personnel can change anytime they want. So you don't get no uh, cookies and cream, pineapple upside down cake, right? Tres leche, tres leche, chocolate cake, bowl of milk. You don't get none of that. You do those things because you want to do those things. Now, with that being said, see, the thing about it, you have other cultures as well that sit back and laugh right on the side. They sit back and watch what the American blacks trauma continue to keep going through, and they sit there and jump their little sinister tails. They know who they are, the ones in certain type of culture within certain segments of each of those cultures. They know who they are. They sit back and we're people of color. The sickness of that. And you got millions of African and Native blacks, American blacks sitting there falling for this crap. Somebody just right over here a generation ago, because they have a little bit of melanation, not the true original melanation, but have a little bit of melanation to their skin and call themselves people of color or have some kind of ethnicity. Oh, we're minorities. Minorities in what country? Everyday person that come over to the country, right? Sitting there anyway, however many person that come to the country every day, how many of them can be called people of color and minorities? When from the other person's original country, how many of them are being prosecuted politically, etc., physically, however, and that's been done by people that look like them. Do you see how crazy that is? But they would arrive here, the numbers what I'm talking about, and call themselves people, or somebody would consider them people of color and minorities, but they come from that person's original country and say, what is a people of color? Well, you are. What's a minority? Well, you are. Do you see the sickness of that? So I want to see, and that's why it's so much needed that the American black needs so badly cultural counseling. Epidemic needs of cultural counseling for the American blacks, the ones that don't want to sit there and keep falling for this nonsense over and over again. See, supremacists don't care about some few amount of American blacks overall that ain't falling for it. They don't care about that. That means nothing to them. Nothing to them. Because they say, look now, are you American blacks, are you in a better position politically, socially, economically, better than you were before? Are you more unified than you were before? When many of you were enslaved and segregated, even after formal slavery was through. How is it that still the 1900s, still up into the mid 1900s, that still anyway, there are still however parts of segregation still going on, and it still had to be more unification by American blacks, where they had per time frame would have had more American black businesses, more unification than now overall. Think about that for a second. It's interesting on that. And see, the thing about it, what other culture, again, have been enslaved for generations more than the African ancestors, Native blacks, or the American blacks? What other culture, huh? Within this system, within the country, what other culture? Do not say Native Americans, because you get your feelings hurt. They were never in a type of enslavement like American blacks. So you can say that nonsense and jump into a volcano with that. You can save that. Because I'm going to ask you, which native tribes were being enslaved? Which area? Which time frames? And you're dirt. I don't want to go into all that because, some people try to play that nonsensical stuff with they try to play that stuff with a person who don't know any better than that. See, that's one of the major problems too. The system in many other cultures, they don't like sitting there having any type of constructive knowledge. They don't like constructive knowledge for any type of American black folks to share or be shared by other cultures. Very few that try to share their thoughts and things like that. They don't like among other American blacks to share information, reality. They don't like that. So they'll use numbers of American black sellouts to do their bidding, just as the sellout slobness piece of crap of number of the sellout versions of numbers ones that were enslaved, right? We're not talking about the brave ones that continue to still fought back against the inhumanity. And that's the thing about, like, it's like, again, to sit there and talk about critical race theory, don't want to teach that in schools when American blacks, again, have been the most hated for generations, the most discriminated, the most oppressed in the country, and get no reparations for it. And then have to sit there and deal with sellouts, and then to deal with people of different cultures, right? That numbers of them within that other culture sit back and sitting there when it comes to people of color, minorities, sitting there grabbing up whatever resources they can, bypassing American blacks every day. And then it's like you get an earth-size slap in the face of numbers of American blacks that you got border breaking legal immigration personnel breaking border immigration laws every day. That's really not talked about enough, right? Every day. And how many come across that border and about to kind of pop out a child or children, right? Along with whatever child or child they had beforehand. If they didn't, they pop another child or two, whatever it is. And what do they get through the 14th Amendment of the Constitution? Through the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, automatic citizenship. Do you see the sinister of that? You break border immigration laws, you get rewarded through the 14th Amendment of the Constitution that was supposed to be for the American blacks. Because they wasn't free. The majority of American blacks still were not free in the 13th Amendment of the Constitution. They were not. And that's the nonsense part that continued to keep them being perpetuated in higher parts of the educational system, talking about that how Lincoln, the great emancipator, said they freed the slaves. He did not. When you free the enslaved personnel, that means you free them, and they then actually have the right to do what they can do. That means also being able to vote, being treated equally, right? And that's not what they were getting, because then 13th Amendment of the Constitution is about the abolishment of slavery. Then, if that's the case, then why would you need a 14th Amendment Constitution, right? That's supposed to be now that when American blacks overall are now supposed to have been born, and prior to that, now they are supposed to be citizens. If that's the case, then why do you need a 15th Amendment? Why do you need a 15th Amendment Constitution then to sit there and try to have then numbers of American blacks to be able to vote? And this kind of stuff is not being taught to enough schools, and there's surely not enough people from different cultures that even know that. And it's on purpose. And then you got some that do know that, but they make sure that they don't want numbers of American blacks to ones that don't know that. See, it's a very sinister system. You got a person every day that come drive to America not knowing jack banana Twinkie nuts about nothing about American black history. But only thing they sit there and see on their television shows, whatever it is, about what they think is American black culture, right? Some black slang, some ebonics, right? Bad version of hip hop. They think that's the American black culture, right? How many people in different cultures, different parts of various parts of the globe use the N-word? Not even know what they're talking about, that is some sinisteristic, illogical mentality, the sickness of people who use that word from some other culture, and don't even know why they're even using it. Well, no, the black folks using it. So what, you silly fool? That was one of the most disgusting words that's ever been created within this country. Because it was not a term of endearment. So you got numbers of people within a predominant culture, the ones that use it. However, numbers of personnel within certain parts of Asian personnel, some personnel Hispanic personnel, some personnel who fly underneath based upon race relating to white, but through however ethnicity they can slide within predominant-based culture, but then go off their own little ethnicity. It's all a crazy, sinister game, right? And numbers of American blacks don't even understand what is going on toward them. They don't even realize it, right? Many of them still don't get that they are dwindling culturally. And many of them are just being used for voting purposes. While numbers of border breaking illegal immigration personnel continue to keep sliding right on past the border because supremacists understands who they want to sit there somewhere soon. It is going to happen. Be it this generation, next generation, however it goes, it is going to happen because they set forth this is what they want to do. The last major American immigration major reform was 1986 on the Immigration Act of 1986, which is supposed to secure the borders basically on that. 1986, 2021, are the borders secured? Halfway secure? I don't think so. When several million border breaking illegal immigration personnel, with the stroke of however pens or pens, whatever it is, became citizens. And what is that? 1986, 2021. What is it, like almost 40 years? Almost 40 years later? Yeah, almost 40 years later, from 1986 to 2021, almost 40 years later, you still got however number of entities out there who know they are, who encourage border breaking illegal immigration personnel because there is an agendas for that. They do not like the American blacks. The American blacks overall, what was the second largest population for generations. They were the second largest population for generations. And now around plus or minus around the year 2000, a few years before 2000, a few years after 2000, plus or minus, they fell down to the third largest population next to Hispanics. And the next culture is Asians. And Asians have more businesses than American blacks, more educated as far as the amount of money that they make more than American blacks. I want you to think about that. But you still got numbers of American blacks walking around calling numbers a section of Asians or numbers of Hispanic person people of color. Black and brown coalition. You hear numbers of Hispanic people walking around talking about brown and black coalitions left and right. See, it's the sickness of numbers of American blacks, right? I mean, the need for cultural counseling among American blacks is such neededness. The black youth suffering every darn day with self-confidence problem. You have numbers of American black males, numbers of American black females suffering every day from American black denial. Again, it's like Dr. Amos Wilson. I didn't finish what I was saying earlier, but the cultural icon, Dr. Amos Wilson, some people have heard about him, many people have not. The great Dr. Amos Wilson was a cultural, I think, psychologist, a psychiatrist, greatness. Know how to speak layman's terms. If you need to speak, higher up terms, he can do that too. Very iconic. Very iconic. And he was giving an example about how it's almost like an embarrassment that, when you got personnel, be it personnel for the predominant coach, whoever else, and they said, we don't see color. And Dr. Amos Wilson was like, but I'm in front of your face, but I have some color in my skin, but you want to pretend that I don't have color? But I'm in front of your face, but I don't see color, but I'm in front of your face. As if there's equality among numbers of personnel within predominant culture and numbers of personnel within the American black culture. As if there's some equality, as if there's ever been equality. Never has it been in the country, equality. How can it be equality when the majority of an American black personnel was removed from the great continent, right, to be brought to the country, to America, to be half as slaves? And the first person that they brought as slaves was the American black male. How can you have equality? I got a question. Do you think Hispanics treat Hispanics overall great among each other? Of course not. There are numbers of sellout Hispanic personnel, but you never hear about them too much. They'll never plaster them out on various parts of Main Street Middle going against their own people. You won't ever handle like that. You won't sit there and have numbers of Asian personnel being plastered on various types of social media or well-known media conglomerates, mainstream version. You won't ever have Asian personnel selling each other out like numbers of American blacks do on those places by purpose. And many of them, very secretly, they're just quiet and keep going about their own business to a certain point. And what happened not too long ago, right? When they got that anti-Asian, the personnel in those positions got the no. I mean, it wasn't a lot of hoopah and papas and koopas. Well, none of that going on, right? When they got that anti-Asian bill passed, it was none of that, was it? They just got that passed. You didn't see numbers of Asian personnel jumping up and down, talking about no justice, no peace, right? We want equality. You didn't hear them jumping up and down. Nope. They got it passed. Did they not? Now, how many of them was blaming black folks, talking about anti-Asian hatred, and how many was talking about American blacks? He said, wait a minute, American blacks are causing more anti-Asian hatred more than numbers of personnel within Predominant culture? Are you crazy? So 12, 13% of the population of blacks compared to over what, 60, 50, whatever, 55, 65, whatever percent of American whites, and you're going to act like 12 to 13% compared to whatever it is, 60, 65, 70, whatever it is now of American whites. So you want to compare that, thinking American blacks have done more anti-Asian hatred than numbers of personnel within predominant culture? Do you see the nonsense of that? You see the nonsense of that, right? When again, that nonsense was not even halfway even truth. But at the same time, numbers of Asian personnel, because again, now I'm not talking about the numbers of good ones out there. You keep doing what you're doing, but that is not the normalcy. And that's what numbers of American blacks keep forgetting. However, numbers of Asian personnel can't stand their guts. Just like numbers of Hispanic persons can't stand their guts. And you still got American blacks in such denial, right through generational black pain, still can't get it through their skulls on that. Many people, how many people from Asian culture, many people from whatever from Hispanic culture, they can't stand one another. Because there's different sections within Asian culture, different sections within Hispanic culture. They don't love each other themselves overall. And that's another topic that people don't want to talk about overall. But going back to numbers of Asian personnel that can't stand black folks, let me just play you something, because these kind of things just cannot be shown enough.
What's the issue?
What's up?
Why are you coming over here?
I just want to see what you guys are taking pictures of.
Why is it your business?
Well, you know what? This is my home.
Okay, I don't know if this thing's going. It's freezing up. I don't know what's going on with that. Let me try again. I have no why this thing is freezing up, but let me try this again.
What's the issue?
What's up?
Why are you coming over here?
I just want to see what you guys are taking pictures of.
Why is it your business?
Well, you know what? This is my home.
Okay, mine too. Why are you taking pictures
Where
of
do you
me?
live?
I live in Scottsdale. Why are you taking pictures of me?
Michigan plates?
Yeah. Why are you taking pictures of me?
Well, you know what? We've had problems here.
I don't care. You don't know me. Why are you taking pictures of me? And I don't know you. Do you know a lot of white men are doing racist things in this world, sir?
No.
You don't know that? You're not aware of that?
I'm a racist.
You are a racist.
I'm a racist.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay? So
what's
the
your
issue?
point? Why are you here?
Because this is a no zone.
I don't know how clear this stuff continues to be. There are numbers of good Asian personnel, and there's quite numbers of bad Asian personnel who can't stand American blacks. And it is so disgusting that, unfortunately, there are numbers of Asian personnel who keep getting free passes by numbers of American blacks. It's like, again, this cultural black annihilation, mental switchery, black pain that keeps happening. And you got numbers of sections of Asian personnel that sit back and laugh every day. Where's all these different Asian personnel not jumping them down to the various parts of legislative personnel saying, hey, we need to sit there and we want to see the American black anti-black bill pass. Also, quietness, isn't it? Quietness as a crawdad crawling in the grass. You can't hear him, can you? Can hear a crawdad sit there crawling in the grass. Very quiet, right? Quietness. Where is the numbers of Asian personnel, right, who know who they are in various positions? Where is the black and yellow coalition to get that bill passed to be black and yellow coalition? Or black and Asian coalition? Nope. because numbers of them didn't care about the American blacks. I don't know why is it that numbers of American blacks are not understanding this. So what? There is a few amount of American blacks that understand it. So what? The system of supremacy does not care. They don't care about some. They are about overall. Any person with any logical common sense understands that you must, as a culture, preserve your culture first. You must preserve your culture first. You must preserve your culture first. You must preserve your culture first. And many African and Native blacks have not figured that out yet. It's not about some, it is the overallness. You saw what I sit there and showed you, because those kind of things I relay over, because just like other shows, because it's like a cultural timepiece. Because again, watch how still in the upcoming year, in 2022, watch how still however numbers of Asian personnel, however numbers of Hispanic personnel are going to show hatred toward the American blacks. Watch. And because some of them don't do that, you got numbers of American blacks that'll sit there and rally toward the some. That is cultural switch insanity. Because no other culture would do stuff like that. So something that has been so switched off among the psyches of American blacks, right? They need extreme cultural counseling. And remember, still the American blacks still have not got any reparations. But they can sit there and pat, I think, what was it, not too long ago, they gave whatever numbers of Asian personnel, I forgot what it was, double-digit millions of dollars for something. Double-digit millions of dollars. Just like that, but American blacks can't even get a few million darn dollars. Do you see how the nonsense of this? I just sit there and showed you what this particular Asian personnel did. He said, what did he say? That he was a racist. Whatever, Dan. I mean, some things are very clear. He said he was a racist. And what did he say? That this is supposed to be a no Negro zone? They make it clear. And you got numbers of American blacks that have such extreme denial, such black pain. It is ridiculous that this Asian person said that he's a racist. And that that was a no Negro zone. But at the same time, they get a bill passed talking about anti-Asian. Do you see this crap? And supremacists sit back and laugh every day. Because it's like numbers of American blacks like infants, right? And they're looking upon numbers of personnel with the predominant culture as godlike, right? Because they know as well that there are some there's some very weak-minded numbers of personnel in various types of political positions by blacks. They know it is. They know it's very few amount of American blacks in certain parts of legislative positions that probably do try. Don't hear too much about them because they're very small amounts. Because anybody in the sense know that how can your culture be in political power and you sit there and do for another person's culture first? That is some mental sickness, generational nonsense. It just is, isn't it? So let me show you something else. Let me show you something else right quick. Let me show you something else. So I'm trying to find what I want to show. Oh, okay, here we go.
We remain a hunted people. Now you think you have a destiny to fulfill in this land that historically has been ours for 40,000 years. And we're a new mestizo nation.
Let me try this again.
We remain a hunted people. Now you think you have a destiny to fulfill.
Just keep freezing. I'm going to try one last time.
We remain a hunted people. Now you think you have a destiny to fulfill in this land that historically has been ours for 40,000 years. And we're a new mestizo nation. This is our homeland. We cannot, we will not, and we must not be made illegal in our own homeland. We are not immigrants that came from another country to another country. We are migrants free to travel the length and breadth of the Americas because we belong here. We are millions. We just have to survive.
Wow. There are millions of American blacks that don't even realize what is truly going on. That what I just showed you is called Aztlan. A-Z-L, A-Z-T-L-A-N, rising. A-Z-T-L-A-N, rising. Right? You heard what the person talking about, they are migrants that's supposed to be able to go where they want to go. Wait a minute, ain't nobody stopping legal personnel. What are you talking about? And I just showed you just a piece of that Aztlan rising. And he said, oh, their land for 40,000 years ago. First of all, there's no such thing as Hispanics 40,000 years ago. What are you talking about? Because the key word in Hispanic is Spanish. Hispanic. Spanish, meaning Spanish. There's no such thing as Spain 40,000 years ago. So you see the nonsense they keep playing these little games because they have some warpness as well. There's a personnel within Hispanic culture that has some warpness as well. Right. And how many numbers of Hispanic personnel in various parts of South America, Central America can't even stand what we want to call indigenous. I don't want to go there, but they don't even like numbers of indigenous personnel. Right? Let alone how many personnel, I don't want to go there. I don't want to do that. So I'm sitting there saying, I would just say, don't even know the history of Central America, to know the history of Mexico, don't know the history of South America. They do not know many of them. See, again, numbers of African Americans, Native Blacks, American Blacks don't understand. There are some good numbers of Hispanic personnel, and there's quite a number of bad. And bad ones can't stand American Blacks. You got ones within a Hispanic culture that want to be like honorary personnel within a predominant-based culture. They think many of them are. Yeah, many Hispanic persons think they are by their non-phenotype. Not even some of the pauper-looking version of Hispanics, right? Even though they look down upon various parts of the border and going south of the border, they look down. The darker they are, the more nonsensical they are treated. Go look up meteorologists. Go look up the telenovelas. Go look up the various Spanish, whatever commercial, whatever it is, and see how do they look. They look more what? White than dark. Heck, in some of those telenovelas, you'd be like, my goodness, that person looks just like a person from Spain. Or not, should I say that? They look also just like somebody within the Panamanian culture. Right? So you have still that type of internal social caste system in various parts of Hispanic culture, but they don't talk about that. People they don't talk about that kind of stuff. So you got people walking around talking about people of color and black and brown coalition. But numbers of American blacks keep falling for this nonsense every darn day. And they're going to pay the price. Millions of American blacks don't even realize they're going to pay the price even more by Hispanics and by Asians. By demographical onslaught already. And American blacks, I keep saying this. American blacks were the second largest population for generations. They fell to the third largest population next to Hispanics. And how many of examples that can easily be given of of numbers of Hispanic persons showing hatred toward American blacks? And American blacks don't get no reparations. So you have to sit there and fight with numbers of personnel from that culture, this culture, that culture, right? Dealing with their hatred toward American blacks, and for them to utilize people of color minority status, bypassing black folks, American blacks every darn day. You got numbers of personnel that's come from whatever other countries, various across the Pacific, whatever it is, and stuff like that. Oh, they're a war-torn country. Oh, they have ethnic violence and stuff like that. He said, wait the freak minute. You put that person from that ethnicity in certain parts of across that Pacific Ocean, and you put them next to somebody that they say another ethnicity, and you put them side by side, you're like, wait a minute, man, you look just alike, right? But how many numbers of them can sit there and come to the country, buy taxpayers' money, whatever situation, can bring people from whatever country over to the country, get benefits, get resources, right? And how many of them can fall under minority and people of color status? Do you see that crazy stuff, right? Think about the situation happening in Afghanistan, to pull out of Afghanistan. How many of them will be considered people of color, right, and minorities coming to America? How many of them are going to have gotten resources, freebies? How many? Wasn't long ago, right? Same thing with Syrians, right? How many of them were brought to the country? How many of them sit there and can be considered people of color and minorities? Never talked to truly American black. Never saw one in their own country, let alone. And they can self-segregate themselves, not by segregation policies, but segregate themselves to their own people. But when numbers of American black folks, they say, oh, you know, they may want to be around each other, then why y'all sitting there segregating yourselves? But numbers of personnel within the predominant culture continuously segregate themselves to themselves, especially how you go. Isn't it interesting that numbers of them can do that? Numbers of Asian people continue to sit there and self-segregate themselves among each other. Numbers of Hispanic personnel self-segregate themselves among each other. Now, you may have a little bit more Hispanics that you may see around numbers of American blacks, but that's just the way that goes on that. But the overall is not like that. That's more self-segregation. And how many of them can't stand American blacks? So the thing about it again is that the American blacks have the most hatred toward one another. The American blacks, the Hispanics never had a history of being enslaved in this country. The Asian personnel certainly did not have a history of being enslaved in this country for generations. So who else you got? You say, what about the Native Americans? I'm not going to play that kind of disgusting game. I just sit there and said that, again, which Native Americans? All right? Just like people talk about Trail of Tears. Well, that's another sinister type of tactic. Even though it's a bad thing, how people don't even discuss, because many people don't even know. You say, wait a minute, there was black natives in the Trail of Tears. What are you talking about? But they make sure not to talk about that. So how many we would call Native Americans, sit there, I'm going to all that, get reparations, right? Where's the American Native and Black Coalition? Nope. Quiet as a chameleon in a tree. But how many natives who know they are getting reparations? American natives getting reparations. How many, and again, American natives were not put in enslavement for generations. It's common sense. So they certainly weren't building plantations. They certainly wasn't in any kind of formal segregation policies like American blacks. I would say this. Again, show me where the Native Americans, we want to call them. Show me where the Asians. Show me where segments of Asians. Show me where sections of Hispanics had a brown section or yellow section. Show me where the same personnel had to go to the top of some type of, or sit in the back of a movie theater, or sit on the top deck of a movie theater in the brown section, in the yellow section, Native American section. Do you see the crazy of that? Do you see the crazy of that? Because there's no such darn thing. Show me where however many places were Browns or Hispanic personnel, Asian personnel, where you best believe in certain cities, by night, you better not be in that city. You better get out of their city, right? Because you might sit there and get lynched. Nope. Because there was no such thing. Because you're talking about the mid-1900s, there was an insignificant amount of demographics of Hispanics, let alone there surely was a insignificant numbers of Asian personnel. So how can a personnel compare to the American black hatred for generations? Nobody compares to that. And there are personnel within the predominant culture that truly know, my goodness, they think whoever every day, boy, they not American black. Whew. Numbers of Hispanic person, you best believe they would not want to be part of the American Black history. The numbers of Asian person that could not even comprehend, could not survive the American Black onslaught toward American Blacks for generations. Couldn't even survive that. And again, back to what we call Native Americans, how many of them enslaved American Blacks had them after the Civil War? That still people don't want to talk about. That's disgusting. Now, numbers of people don't even know that because numbers of Native Americans, we want to call them that, don't want nobody talking about that. And I understand why. I got it. So again, whatever numbers of Native Americans get these good reparations all the time. The white man took our land, but no one tells them to get over it. You talking about the Trail of Tears? That was almost 100 years ago. Why are you still talking about that? Get over it. Get over it. Put your own self by your bootstraps. Put your own darn cells on. Build your own darn boats. Right? Build your own darn houses. Be your own self-sufficiency. Nope. Nope. The white man took our land. Do you see that? You see that? I mean, to me, it's disgusting because it's so simple to see what people are doing. But through the system of supremacy, the most brilliant mental manipulation force that's ever existed, that you got American Blacks that have so much black pain, they can't see through this stuff. It's too ingrained not to see it. So for many American Blacks, only have half a generation to one generation left. The American Blacks overall have less than half a generation to one generation left. That's it. I mean, this stuff is ridiculous. I mean, even again, when you look at the crime, now again, when you look at the crime stats, right? Like people talking about the anti-Asian by blacks, right? As if numbers of personnel with the Panamese culture have not been doing that for however long, right? But they got to blame the American Blacks because that's what people do. As I said at the beginning of this podcast, the American Blacks overall have been designated as the culture to be bullied for perpetuity, to blame them for everything that happens overall. Remember the financial crisis, was it 2007, 2008, something like that, where they were blaming black American Blacks for getting mortgages they could not afford, which is a bunch of bogus nonsense. So 12 to 30% of the population, right, was within the ones that have home ownership, even though American Blacks have some of the lowest home ownership, but you're going to blame them for financial catastrophe, right? Finances, the mortgage breakdown, you're going to blame them. Do you see the nonsense of this crap, right? It was something I was reading, whatever time frame before, that rarely ever was brought up. And so for some people, this might be very new. I read something about that they was talking about how there was numbers of illegal immigrant personnel that were getting mortgages and how many of them was also helping out with that financial crisis because how many of the legal immigration personnel were being given mortgages. But they don't talk about that. So you got to blame somebody. You got to blame the American Blacks overall, again, that has the lowest home ownerships. You see the sinister stuff. And it's like, again, the American Blacks overall, like, it's like infants, right? Even though, again, there's no person ever in this country that compares to the race of the historical great powerhouse of the African ancestors Native Blacks. There is no comparisons. So even when people talk about Sojourner Truth, there is no comparison of an Hispanic Sojourner Truth. There is no comparison of an Asian Sojourner Truth. There's no comparison of a Native American Sojourner Truth. Certainly, there's no Rosa Parks of an Asian persuasion, of an Asian Hispanic persuasion, of a Native American persuasion. There certainly is not a Malcolm X, Martin Luther King equivalent for Asians, for Hispanics, for Native Americans. There's no Paul Robeson's. The great Paul Robeson's, Asian persuasion, Hispanic persuasion, Native American persuasion. There is none. There is none. No comparison. There's no George Washington Carver, right? There is none like that. There is none. There is none of comparisons. And even with the service part, there is no comparison on the great heroicness of the American Black in the service of this country for the American Revolutionary War forward. There is none comparison. And you got people that have the darn dastardly nerve talking about if somebody's kneeling down because of certain types of enforcement brutality, some of the bad seeds, even though the question asked, do you not realize that there is numbers of American blacks that are in certain parts of enforcement that have been brought up that they have been racially racized by some person within predominant culture within certain parts of enforcement? Then how do you explain that? How do you explain that there are certain numbers of high numbers of American blacks within certain parts of service that have brought forth also racial racism that was put upon a number of them? How do you explain that? Because he can't. But something that is so sinister by some personnel, numbers of personnel within the predominant culture that has been so warped, it's like etched in numbers of their DNA that they cannot understand the truth. They can't. It is impossible. It's like it's like a hyena. Generational. It is a predator. If it sees a prairie dog has been etched for generations to be on edge like a gazelle. It's like a wolf. It's etched with predatory tendencies. It looks upon a gazelle with predatory tendencies. You got numbers of personnel within predominant culture generationally have been etched with predatory tendencies. If that means lying about what they got, lots of numbers of will. If that means showing American hatred toward the blacks, numbers of them will. Do you see them come? They will continue to do that overall, with few exceptions. That's why, again, some ones within Panamanian culture, credit given to the ones that do not act like a quiet number of ones within a culture that don't that are not. Oh, they don't act. Some of them don't act like ones within a culture that have enormous of American hatred toward American blacks. But again, sidetracks with that numbers of American blacks keep talking about white supremacy. Now, I don't want to go on all that. I don't even use the word white supremacy in this way anymore. Well, I didn't use that before. That's a whole different topic, right? Because now that's become a cool point on that for people to use, right? But again, to focus on white supremacy, then again, that sidetracks numbers of Asian supremacy, sidetracks numbers of Hispanic supremacy, sidetracks high numbers of Native American supremacy. Do you see where I'm coming from? And that's brilliant to do that. But watch this for a second. I want you to imagine something and show me the comparison of this.
Oh, I come from Alabama with my banjo on my knee. As I grind to Louisiana, my true love for to see. Oh, it rained so hard the day I left, the weather it was dry. The sun so hot I froze to death. Susanna, don't you cry. Oh, Susanna, don't you cry for me. I've come from Alabama with my banjo on my knee. Oh, I had a dream the other night when everything was still. I thought I saw Susanna dear a-coming down the hill. The buckwheat cake was in her mouth, the tear was in her eye. Says I was a-coming from the south. Susanna, don't you cry. Oh, Susanna, don't you cry for me. I've come from Alabama with my banjo on my knee. Oh.
The blackface syndrome. I want you to go show where Asian personnel had this happen to them, where they sit there and had yellow face on just like that. And in the comparison, I want you to show me the brown face just like that. And in the comparison, I want you to show me the Native American face just like that. I said just like that. Just like that, because there's no comparison. And the personnel within those cultures who know, very few that know what I'm talking about, they know what I'm telling is truth. And many of them make sure not to talk about that, with very few exceptions. And how many cultures, from Hispanics to Asians to Native Americans to people that come from different other countries, have no clue about that part. That part was going on. And that was still going on after the Statue of Liberty, when however number you want to say immigrants, Statue of Liberty, Ellis Island, some people crying, oh, trying to get away from that person's native country to come to America to start a better life. And this was still going on afterwards. Do you see the hypocrisy of this? And supremacists knows this. That's why, again, they are the most awesome mental manipulation force ever existed, because they put stuff right in front of millions of American black faces, and millions of American black faces, excuse me, I said black and black face, and millions of American blacks just refuse because, again, black pain has infiltrated their mindsets with so much self-hatred that they've been told to not talk about the past. That is mental sickness. You don't tell numbers of Asian personnel to forget about the past. You don't sit there and tell a Hispanic person to forget about the past. You don't tell numbers of Native American people to talk about the past. No one does that except numbers of people within American black culture. That's why it's getting so much black pain going on. Who's gonna suffer the most? The American black youth, because they run around bumping into walls, not knowing their powerful historical past. Right? Walking around, however many of them walking around calling each other the N-word. Listen to bad versions of hip hop. Where's the constructive parts of hip hop? Listen, I mean, hey, how to the person has a choice in the matter. You can listen to some bad versions of hip hop, okay, fine. But at least in the late 70s, but especially 80s and parts of the 90s, there was a mixture. But especially in those 80s, there was a good mixture. You want to talk about, no, that's not. So you want to listen to some bad versions of hip hop? Okay, that's fine. But then you have some good constructive, thought-provoking hip-hop on that. That's different, right? And see, these people are so supreme, so brilliant, because they now in the 21st century even more, they got done with the personnel with certain types of American black women and certain types of American black men still talking about using N-words, sitting there doing all types of nonsensical parts and bad version of hip-hop, right? I mean, think about this for a second. What other culture? Show me where the Asians, show me where a number of Spanish, show me the numbers of Native Americans where they were sitting there profiting themselves off and sitting there talking about getting the word off to vote. And you had twerking numbers of Asian women, twerking numbers of Hispanic women, twerking numbers of Native American women. Show where that happens. Do you see the crazy of this kind of crowd? And so supremacy is brilliant. See, again, black pain is real pain. And quite a number of American blacks cannot be saved. They just cannot. Many are long far gone in their mentality over generation, right? It's like the prairie dog and the gazelle. You know, they have become so warped, and that to deny what is really going on. Now, the prairie dogs who have not denied it, they still continue to survive. Prairie dog walk out there and think, I'm a prairie dog, I do what I want to do. Or the gazelle, I do what I want to do. They get eaten. Do they not? Get eaten. So supremacists symbolically sit there eats up American blacks every day and they get reminded every day by American black hatred toward American blacks, which then tears up their mentalities and becomes even more warped and has more self-hatred and still can't get no reparations. I'm gonna read you this lastly from the White Man's Bible, 1981. The N-word. Remember, I said 1981, and remember I said how you still got bad versions of hip hop and personnel using the N-word, and how many numbers of black youth using N-word, how many numbers of Hispanics, however numbers of Asians, how many numbers of Native American, however numbers of one using N-word, and certainly however numbers of many versions of personnel within the Panama Coast, however numbers of used N-word. Right? I know what they talking about, and then how the nerve to blame some black personnel use it because some of it have become so black pained out in their mindset to keep using that word. That is some of the most dastardly word have ever been created. N-word. White Man's Bible, 1981. N-word or N-word. We use the term N-word deliberately in this book and recommend its usage in general conversation. As we have stated in the previous chapter, the second dumbest creature on the face of the earth is one who can't or won't recognize his enemies, and the dumbest of all is that creature which will actively collaborate with his enemies for the destruction of his own race. Let me say this lastly again. White Man's Bible, 1981. N-word or N-word, we use the term N-word deliberately in this book and recommend its usage in general conversation. As we have stated in a previous chapter, the second dumbest creature on the face of the earth is one who can't or won't recognize its enemies, and the dumbest of all is that creature which will actively collaborate with its enemies for destruction of its own race. Man, how powerful it is. And that was 1981. So you're talking about 40 something years ago. You hear what they said, N-word or N-word, that we use the term N-word, talking about them and the white man's Bible in that book. 40 years ago, here it is. That's almost 2 generations. And here it is, 2021, getting close to December and begin of a different year and going to 2022, and you still got numbers of personnel still using the N-word, and then try to deflect and blame American blacks that suffer from some of the most mental sickness out there culturally, of no comparison and no reparations, no restorative justice, none, no cultural counseling, none. But it's still told to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps while other personnel get reparations who know who they are, while other personnel are brought to this country and they help them out to give them benefits. While have numbers of other personnel saying, hey, this person took their land, getting reparations. The list goes on and on and on. It's almost like just the most dastardly super slap in the faces of millions of American blacks that don't understand how these things look. Because it is disgusting, the type of American black hatred that millions of American blacks continue to keep happening with so much black pain toward them. And I'm not talking about ones that are lost. They cannot be saved. Many American blacks cannot be saved. They're lost. I'm not talking about them. Not talking about them. They will be ate up by other numbers of person that was in the Padamese culture, numbers of Asian, numbers of Hispanics, numbers of Native Americans. They would eat them up no matter what. I'm not talking about literally, obviously, but I'm talking about just bypassing them in some kind of way. You said, well, the Native American people, see, that's the kind of game. See, people take that stuff literally. I'm talking about Native Americans that still getting reparations. You can go on with that nonsense. My goodness. But I'm just saying they're still bypassing American blacks still, and still getting reparations. And numbers of Asian personnel that still can't stand American blacks, they're just sitting there quietly, sitting there and just doing their thing in businesses and socialness and politically. And Hispanic personnel, hey, numbers of them sitting there again, just buying their own time, doing politically, socially, economically, etc. And this, demographically. So again, the American blacks overall have only half a generation to 1 generation left. That's it. Because you cannot resolve anything that you cannot address. That's the first thing of cultural survivorship and generational survival, that you cannot attain generational survivorship unless you address the problems that affect the culture over and over again, and stop trying to use people of color and minority. I thank you for tuning in to the Real CP Show. I am CP.